Hi, my name's Janine Lewington and I'm Head of English and Learning Support at NIS International School. I'm going to talk to you today about how pupils learn and how, working with you, we would optimise your children's progress and attainment while ensuring that they're happy, safe and excited to learn. Children and teenagers learn by observing, by listening, by exploring, by experimenting and by asking questions. Being interested, motivated, and engaged in learning is something that's really important for children who need to understand why they're learning things. Many children benefit from additional support at some point during their educational journey to meet educational, social, or emotional needs. We strive to be responsive to the particular needs and weaknesses of each of our pupils in order to provide every opportunity for them to reach their potential. As Head of Learning Support, I work closely with parents, teachers, and teaching assistants to ensure that any concerns are identified and closely monitored. Experienced teaching assistants can work with small groups or individuals to provide specific support under my guidance and that of the head of our preparatory school, Ms. Vicky. We can work closely with outside agencies, including educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, whenever further assessment or intervention is required. I want to talk a little bit about success. Success is like a vitamin. Everyone needs some of it. When you don't have enough success, it's very hard to feel good around the people around you who are successful. When you're growing up, school is the place where you learn the most about success, what it is, where to find it, how much of it you normally have. You can usually tell how successful you are just about every day in school. In school, if you learn quickly and easily, if you're good at pleasing your parents and your teachers, if you feel as capable as other pupils, then school can be a great experience. But for some kids, school is less fun because they have trouble succeeding and they just don't feel good about learning. For those children, the last few months may have been welcomed as they have been learning in the comfort of their own homes where relationships don't have to be worked at in quite the same way as friendships among peers. We're delighted to have been able to welcome our entire cohort back to school this week, as although online learning has taken place throughout these past few months, nothing beats face-to-face communication and interaction for teaching pupils. Because everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, we are all different from each other in the ways in which we function. We're all different from each other as people. At Nili International School, we know this. We make it our job to know your children. We know them, we know how best they learn, and we use this information to ensure that they're happy, feel safe, and that they learn. I want to talk about the brain a little bit. Brains are made up of billions of tiny nerve fibres that connect with each other in many different ways. The brain is so complicated in its wiring that it should not be surprising that no two brains are exactly the same. This means that there can be a great number of different learning strengths and also learning difficulties among populations, and of course, therefore, including children in school. Worldwide, however, there is a received notion that there is such a thing as a typical brain, and therefore an atypical one. School examinations are designed for pupils with typical brains, and therefore we must ensure that as far as is possible, we enable our pupils to have the allowances that they need to perform optimally in exams. If your child needs extra academic or pastoral support, we provide that. It might be that psychometric testing reveals that for examinations, extra time, or laptop use, or having a reader, or using a reading pen, or taking rest breaks, or having separate invigilation, it may be that any one of these things, or a combination of these things, is necessary. At Nili International School, we know this, and we can put these things in place for your child. Since nobody understands completely all the parts of the brain and their connections, nobody completely understands all the possible difficulties that can cause children to have a very hard time at school. Fortunately, there are many things that we do know. We know that the two hemispheres of the brain are responsible for different things, and that it's likely that we are stronger in one than in the other. We know learning difficulties may look like laziness, when really the problem isn't laziness at all. A student may appear to be lazy because they're not getting good results at school, and then maybe they just stop trying. For some people, schoolwork requires superhuman effort, so much effort that they may decide not to try. This can make people think that they are poorly motivated or that they just don't care, when actually really they do care a lot. We know that it is possible to understand something, but not remember it later. We know it's possible to remember something without understanding it. But to learn, you have to understand and remember. Of course, it's easier to remember ideas you understand. Plus, it's much easier to understand something new when you can remember what went before it. When understanding and remembering work well together, best learning takes place. Memory. Memory can be either short-term or long-term, temporary or permanent. When you register new information, you are putting it into the short-term memory. Some of the things that you record, you will want to keep only long enough to use once. Other things, you may remember only long enough to use them to do a task or a job. For example, if a teacher gives more than one instruction at a time, you need to remember all of the directions while you're trying to understand them. But once you know what you're supposed to do, you can just go ahead and do it, and after that you can forget the instructions. Some of what we register is only temporary, but there is also a large amount of information and skill that is supposed to be kept permanently, that needs to get into the long-term memory. For example, when you learn spelling words, important facts, or a new friend's name, you want to store these things in your long-term memory. But things like that you deliberately store, they have to pass through the short-term memory and then get into long-term memory. At NIS International School, our teachers understand the importance of rehearsal and repetition, and of the consolidation of knowledge to help pupils move important things into long-term memory. There are many kinds of memory, and as many problems related to these. Many pupils with memory problems don't know that they have them. So memory is one of the most important ingredients that allows pupils to work and learn effectively in school and to revise for tests and exams at home. You can help your child by ensuring that conditions for studying at home are optimal. They need a quiet space with lots of light and no distractions. Take away all electronics, including phones, if your child has studying to do. If they need their phones or iPads for a part of their homework, then allow this, but please remove them as soon as that section of the evening's work is done. New material will be quickly forgotten without sufficient rehearsal. Rehearsal helps students to access information quickly and easily when required. Now, this is necessary for all pupils, but it's absolutely necessary for pupils with any kind of learning difficulty. For example, many dyslexic pupils need to overlearn in order to remember. Consider a ratio of 5:1. A dyslexic student will need to process information approximately 5 times and in different ways to be able to recall effectively, and even then, only when given sufficient time to do so. Additional time needs to be spent by all students summarising the notes from that day at school, rephrasing anything they didn't quite understand, elaborating on new material so that it can become stored in their long-term memory, easily retrieved from the long-term memory, and then it can be used for new learning, for problem solving, and to produce synthesized responses. We know that time spent teaching pupils how to do this will be time well spent, and this is factored into our planning. It must not be assumed that pupils will develop these skills automatically. We know that pupils should begin IGCSE courses having been taught study and memory skills early in their school careers. Pupils need to be taught how to learn, not just what to learn, right from early years. So, we've looked at memory, one of brain's functions. Language is another function we use all of the time, as is attention. There are more brain functions that affect learning. For example, the abilities that the brain has to solve problems and help us to do the best possible work in school. Visuospatial ability gives us information about the position of things in space, about shapes and how they differ from each other, and about the size of objects. A brain that is good at handling visuospatial information can recognize that a picture on a particular page is not just a square but a cube. The same ability shows us the difference between a circle and a ball. Much visual spatial understanding takes place in the right hemisphere of the brain, and a pupil with good visual spatial understanding and skill will be adept at things like map work in geography. Understanding and remembering information that comes into your mind in a particular order is called sequencing ability. As you get older, you can understand and hold longer and longer sequences of things in your memory. If you give a 6 or 7-year-old child a list of numbers to repeat, he'll probably be able to remember about 4 or 5 of them in the correct order. By the age of 14 or 15, it's most likely that they will be able to repeat 6 or even 7 numbers in the right order. Now, sequencing ability is helpful for following complicated directions. It's also important for understanding how time works. So it's not surprising that some pupils who have sequencing problems get mixed up about the days of the week or the months of the year. When they're very young, these children may be mixed up about words like before and after, now and later, yesterday and tomorrow. Some children show sequencing problems not until they get to school, and then they might have trouble arranging their ideas in the right order in a report or in an essay. They might get confused about the order of their classes at the beginning of the school year. They may have trouble figuring out how to schedule their time. In other words, pupils with sequencing problems are pretty often quite disorganized and struggle with executive functioning. Another important brain function is motor function. Motor function has to do with our muscles and how well they perform. The human body contains a lot of different motors, muscles, and these motors are controlled by your brain. There are essentially 2 motor systems that are especially important to children in school. One is gross motor skills, the gross motor system, and the other is the fine motor system. And there are big differences between pupils' gross and fine motor skills. Motor skills result from cooperation between many parts of your brain, including the parietal lobes, the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, the brain stem, and the spinal cord. All work together to help us move our body in various ways. Gross motor skills have to do with getting your whole body to move just the right way at just the right time in just the right space. And well-functioning motor skills often enable you to be good at sports. Fine motor skills have to do with getting your fingers to work accurately and doing things like writing, drawing, sewing, fixing things by hand. These all require fine motor skill to enable your fingers to work quickly and together. These become more and more important in school as pupils progress through the grades and are expected to write larger amounts of material. As you can imagine, some pupils are really good in their motor skills, while others have problems. Some pupils have excellent gross motor skills for things like sport, but they have poor fine motor skills for things like writing. Some have better fine motor skills than gross motor skills. And it's also possible to be good at some fine motor activities like drawing, but not at others like writing. Okay, thinking. Thinking is something we do all of the time while we're awake. Much of the time during the day, we can think about whatever we want to. But when it comes to school pupils, they often have to think about things that someone else picks for them to think about so that they can learn. And this can be a huge strain on a pupil's brain. It's this kind of hard thinking that can be difficult for some pupils. Thinking is a real skill, and like other skills, it can always be improved. One important way to improve thinking is to do some thinking about thinking. Metacognitive skills are something that we teach explicitly at NIS International School. Solving problems. We all have to solve problems all of the time. So the ability to be a good problem solver is a very important thinking skill. Outside school, there are social problems, personal problems, health problems, problems with things that break, like a bicycle chain. Now, people are very different from each other in their abilities to solve various problems, and pupils don't differ. Obviously, problem solving in school is crucial. Your children come across one problem after another in almost every subject, almost every day. Maths problems, I guess, are the most obvious ones, but there are also problems to solve in figuring out the meaning of a story, deciding what to write in a book report, taking a multiple choice test, or doing a project for global perspectives. Another kind of thinking is called critical thinking. When pupils think critically, they use knowledge as well as their own point of view to decide what's right and what's wrong in someone else's ideas. Therefore, pupils need to be able to evaluate ideas to see if they reflect good judgment. If pupils use their critical thinking skills well, then they can write good book reports. They can be good at debating, they can become good at arguing, and they can get much more out of everyday things like newspapers, magazines, conversations. No two people think in exactly the same way, and there are very many different styles of thinking. Pupils can be good at thinking in one subject, but not so good at thinking in another. So, we've thought about memory, about language, about attention, about visual spatial skills, about sequencing, about motor functions, and about thinking. At NIS International School, we know what our pupils' brains needs, and this is our solution. The jigsaw you see here is indicative of the high quality schooling your children will benefit from at NIS International School. The best teaching and a well-designed curriculum which ensures that pupils grow incrementally in justified self-confidence in their ability to learn and make progress in mastering appropriately rigorous content. Pedagogical approaches take account of the best research and evidence, and we ensure that an understanding of different learning styles also informs the curriculum design. We ensure the curriculum's effective delivery through a programme of supportive and collaborative best practice, and teachers work closely together to ensure that what they are delivering in the classroom is quality teaching, enabling pupils to make the maximum amount of progress. Alongside our eco-school ethos and taught curriculum, there is strong provision for co-curricular activities. Our programme is designed to focus on high-quality activities across a wide spectrum of different domains, for example, cultural, creative, sporting, physical, service-oriented, and volunteering, which all enable pupils to participate over time, to learn and to improve in their chosen activities, and to compete or perform as appropriate. Participation is enabled for all pupils in the school, all through a careful understanding of the most common barriers to participation and a thorough knowledge of our pupils.